Today's video centers around one of the most mysterious disappearances in US history. In the summer of 1942, a US Navy blimp set out to survey for Japanese subs off the California coast. Later that day, the blimp arrived back over land and aimlessly crashed into the ground below. When authorities opened the cockpit, they were shocked to see that there was no one in there. The two crew members had seemingly vanished. Now, this case has captured the attention of people from all across the world and has since been dubbed the Ghost Blimp. Before we start, am I the only one who had no idea that the US used blimps in warfare? Like, imagine being an enemy and looking up and just seeing the Goodyear blimp just raining hellfire upon you. How demoralizing is that? The mystery of the Ghost Blimp began on August 16th, 1942, when Flight 101 was preparing for takeoff. On board was Ensign, how the hell do you pronounce that? Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, a 34-year-old pilot, and Lieutenant Ernest Dewitt Cody, a 27-year-old pilot, both of whom were considered highly experienced. An interesting note is that there was actually supposed to be a third member aboard the blimp that day, mechanic Riley Hill. However, Hill was mysteriously ordered off the flight just moments before takeoff. That makes me angry, because had this mechanic just been on the flight that day, maybe they wouldn't have gone missing and we wouldn't be talking about this. I would feel so guilty if I was him, so I feel bad for him. Shouts to him. He's probably dead right now, which is a very morbid thought. The beginning of their flight was relatively uneventful. However, roughly an hour and a half in, the blimp spotted oil slick below, a potential sign of a submarine in the area. They radioed flight control and told them of their findings, while also adding that they would investigate further. However, the crew never radioed back with any other findings, and were never heard from again. This last transmission came in at approximately 7:42 a.m., and just minutes later, the crew dropped flares in the water, potentially to mark the location of a possible sub. So they radio in, they think they see something in the water, they're gonna go investigate, they drop some flares to mark the location, and then they were never heard from again. From there, a nearby fishing boat watched the blimp circle the area for well over an hour. At times, the blimp would get as close as 30 feet to the water, but did not drop any bombs or radio in. When the blimp left, the fishermen claimed that they were able to clearly see Adams and Cody through their binoculars. And that's actually a key point of this case. Most of what we know of what happened that day is solely based on eyewitness testimony. That's what makes this case so annoying and frustrating, because you really don't know what to trust. Sometimes people are wrong and sometimes people just lie. From there, the balloon wasn't seen till 10:49, when a pilot spotted the blimp at an altitude of 2,000 feet, a potentially dangerous height for blimps of this kind to be flying at. This is because the air in the blimp can't handle the pressure of being at that altitude. So that involves a lot of physics and science stuff that your boy doesn't know. But the key takeaway here is that the blimp was actually seen, and it wasn't just the blimp. The pilot also claims to have seen both Cody and Adams in the gondola. The gondola is apparently like the cockpit almost, a little place underneath the blimp. I kind of like the ring of gondola, so I'm going to start saying that for the rest of the video. The balloon then descended towards a nearby beach where it touched down on the sand briefly and then was lifted back up, causing the gondola to strike the side of a hill. The blimp was then lifted again until it eventually landed in a nearby suburb, crashing into rooftops and finally setting on top of a car. The story about the car that it landed on is actually pretty funny, because it was like a freshly washed, freshly polished, sparkling clean car, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this big old blimp just lands on it. At this point, a large crowd had been following the balloon, and they gathered to watch its crash landing. But they were all left shocked as firefighters opened the cockpit and discovered that it was empty. Yeah, this is kind of crazy, but word of this balloon spread all across town apparently, and people were following it. Like, they were actually watching it in the sky and waiting to see where it would land. So by the time it crashed, there was a huge gathering of people already there. Despite a massive search effort and investigation, the men were never found, and to this day, the incident is still officially labeled as 100% unknown/undetermined. What this investigation did reveal was that the blimp was in total working order. Aboard, they found out that the radio was fully operational. Also, all three of their parachutes were left on the blimp. and the blimp's only life raft was left untouched. And finally, on the control panel laid one of the pilot's hats. So in summary, everything was normal in the gondola. So with a case this mysterious, there have been a ton, and I mean a ton, of theories offered as to what could have happened to these men. Here are just a few. Our first theory also happens to be the most innocent, and that is that both men simply fell out of the blimp. Although this may sound far-fetched, there actually is a scenario where this may have happened. Perhaps one of the pilots was working on some repair over the edge when he slipped and plunged into the water below. In an attempt to rescue his crewmate, the other pilot may have lowered the blimp, and when trying to rescue him, may have also fallen out. This theory could explain why the blimp had been surveying a specific spot for over an hour, and could be the reason that the blimp dropped flares and was lowered to just 30 feet above the surface. It would also explain why everything was in perfect working order in the gondola. Oh, if this truly did happen, it would not be a good look for those pilots. Like, it's kind of like, should I say it? It's kind of like a Dumb and Dumber situation, you know? Like, the one slips out and then the other one falls in after him. That is a rough look, but is it possible? Well, let me start by saying there are plenty of issues with this theory. For starters, remember that fishing boat that I told you was watching them through their binoculars? Well, they didn't report seeing any of this, and they likely would have caught on if it was a rescue attempt. And they probably would have seen somebody in the water too. Also, neither their bodies or clothes or belongings washed up onto shore or anything like that, or were found in the water for that matter, which just kind of adds more doubt to this theory. And then you throw in the fact that the pilot who saw them 2,000 feet in the air also claimed to have seen both of the pilots in the gondola. It makes this theory seem not totally impossible, but very, very improbable. The second theory is that the two soldiers were captured by Japanese forces. After all, the Japanese did pose a big threat to the United States at the time, and the blimp was actively searching for these Japanese submarines. Now, I'll admit, when I first heard this theory, I really liked it. Like, it makes sense. You know, this is World War II, like the two sides are going at it. It wouldn't be hard to believe that something like this could potentially have happened. But then I realized this. The blimp was seen with the pilots on board so many times throughout that day that there really was no time for this kidnapping to have happened. And because of all this eyewitness testimony, there's no way that blimp would have had time to have landed anywhere for them to be captured. And that's the other thing. How would they get captured by a sub that's in the water when they're up in the air? And the final nail in this theory's coffin is that Japan later released all its files from the war, and there was no mention of this capture anywhere, which all but disproves this theory. Now, the third theory is where things start to get really bizarre. The theory is that there was a hijacker aboard the blimp. On the day of the crew's disappearance, a credible witness claimed to have spotted the crew in the gondola. But what makes this testimony so unusual is that the witness also claimed to have seen another man. So 3 men were reported in the gondola rather than 2. Based on this testimony, it has led some to believe that this mysterious third person may have been a hijacker who hijacked the blimp and forced the men to jump off. Adding more fuel to this fire, a man claimed to have seen someone parachuting to the ground just moments before the blimp's crash landing. Given that none of the parachutes were missing from the gondola, it can be assumed that that wasn't one of the crew members. So maybe a hijacker had hid in the blimp with their own parachute. Now, I've read a ton of articles on the ghost blimp, and when it comes to this theory, nobody seems to really take it seriously, which I understand, but at the same time, I find it really interesting. However, where it falls flat for me is that this is a theory entirely based on eyewitness testimony. Only one person had claimed to have seen 3 people in that cockpit, and only one person saw this man parachuting down to the ground. So can we really base an entire theory off of what 2 people think they saw? And further casting doubt on this, the Navy actually came forward and said very adamantly that there was no way this could have been a hijacking. So unless new information comes forward, this theory is pretty much dead in the water. Oh my god, that was a pun! Am I becoming a dad? The next theory is based around a rumor that Cole and Adams were involved in a love triangle. This love triangle may have caused feelings to grow bitter between the two, and while in the blimp, one of the men murdered the other. Believers in this theory say that the body was dumped, and then when the blimp crashed, the surviving man simply escaped into the crowd. Nah. I mean, I like this. There's a nice flair to this, and I feel like it would make a very good movie. I don't know. I don't like this theory because it is solely based on a rumor that by most accounts is untrue. And what I also don't like is the explanation given to where the other person went. There is no way that that blimp crashed with all those people around and nobody saw the man get out. It's a no from me on this one. But then again, can I rule it out completely? No. Our final theory is certainly out there, but has recently become one of the more popular explanations. And this theory is that the blimp was actually testing secret government technology. It's theorized that the crew was tasked with using a brand new type of sonar technology, one that relied heavily on the use of microwaves. And maybe these microwaves were poorly shielded and eventually caused the crew to get lightheaded and pass out and potentially fall overboard. Now listen, I am not sure about this theory, I will be honest. It is definitely the most popular one as of right now. Let's just be real, I could be too dumb to understand it. Because when I hear microwaves, I'm thinking of like microwaves that I cook my food in. I just can't comprehend this stuff. But this may explain why the Navy never came forward with any reasoning as to what had happened. Potentially they were covering it up. Very bold claim, I know. And it would explain a lot of things, but I also think that the gondola would be in a state of disarray if this was really the case. You know, things would be knocked over. It wouldn't look so neat and so perfect. And that's what's so crazy about this case. Every single theory has its flaws, and they're all pretty glaring flaws if I'm being honest. And the lack of plausible theories has led people to believe that maybe this was a case of alien abduction. But the unfortunate truth is that we'll probably never know what happened aboard that blimp. Hopefully someday new evidence will come out and we will finally get closure on this case. But until then, it's really anyone's guess. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you very soon with another video. Wait a minute. Oh my god. It's actually the Goodyear blimp. I said that as a joke earlier. They turned this fucker into the Goodyear blimp.